The Humiliated Father I, Part 2 of 4. In the final analysis, I say final analysis of course, in terms of what is on the horizon within our function in psychoanalysis, we are there as that, ça in French, meaning the id, that shuts up and that shuts up about its lack in being. We are in the final analysis, by our presence, our own subject up to the point where it is eclipsed, where it is barred. It's for this reason that we can fill out the same place where the patient, as a self-effacing subject, subordinates her himself and subordinates her himself to all the signifiers of his own demand. This is not only produced at the level of regression, at the level of the treasure chest of signifiers in the unconscious, at the level of the Wunsch, wish, vocabulary insofar as we decipher it during the analytic experience, but in the final analysis at the level of the fantasy. I say in the final analysis insofar as the fantasy is the only equivalent to the discovery of the drive by which it is possible for the subject to indicate the position of the response. The S barred A that he expects from the transference, that makes sense of the S barred A. The fantasy, insofar as the subject grasps her himself as failing in front of a privileged object, barred S lozenge little a object, imaginary degradation of this other at this point of failure. It is a question of knowing whether, in order for us to enter into the transference as the passive subject in this fantasy at the level of barred S, that supposes that in a certain way we really are this S. That we are, in the final analysis, the one who sees the little a object, the object of the fantasy. That we are capable, in whatever experience it is, including an experience that is the most alien to ourselves, to be in the end this seer, the one who can see the other's object of desire, at whatever distance that this other is from her himself. It is exactly because it is thus that you see me, throughout the whole of this teaching, question, do the tour, via all the aspects where not only clinical experience but also more traditional sources can be made use of, on this question of what is man's desire. And you see me, along the road we have travelled together, alternate between the scientific definition, I use this term science in the widest possible sense, as it has been experimented with since Socrates, and something that is the complete opposite, insofar as it is graspable in monuments to human memory, its tragic experience, that is about, as 2 years ago, what I made you make of the original drama of modern man, Hamlet, or last year, this perspective that I tried to give you about what ancient tragedy means in relation to this. It seemed to me in relation to one of these formulations that I encountered, I have to admit, by accident, neither better or worse than those that we currently see in our own circle, on the question of what is the fantasy, from having encountered in the last issue of Bulletin de Psychologie an articulation of which I can say that once again it made me hopping mad with its mediocrity, of this function of the fantasy. But after all, the author, as it was he himself who wished at one time to train a great number of mediocre psychoanalysts, will not, I think, learn much from this critique. That it was exactly this that gave me once again, I can't say the courage, it needs something a bit stronger, a kind of fury to go over it once again via one of these detours, in relation to which I hope that you will have the patience to follow the circuit and to see if there isn't, in our contemporary experience, something onto which we can hang what I am trying to show you, which must always be there, and I will say more than ever during the analytic experience, which is not, after all, conceivable as only having been a miracle that erupted from I don't know what individual mishap that could be called the Viennese petit bourgeois Freud. Assuredly, and of course via a whole ensemble, all the elements of this dramaturgy are there in our epoch, which must allow us to set the drama at the level of those with whom we deal with, when it is a question of desire, and not to content ourselves with a true story, black medical humour, histoire de Carabin, in effect. One can recognise here in passing this theme that I have just cited to you of the fantasy identified with the fact, the certainly deceptive upfront deal, because one can well see it in the text. This is not even a case that has been analysed. It's the story of a travelling salesman who, all at once, from the day when he had been told that he had no more than 12 months to live, had been liberated from what in the text is called his fantasy, i.e. fear of venereal disease, and who, from this moment onwards, using the author's own expression, of which it has to be asked where he got this vocabulary, for it is hard to imagine it even coming out of the mouth of the subject quoted, from this moment onwards, the one who is telling the story could afford it. Such is the uncritical level, to a sufficient degree to make you more than suspicious, to which the level of human desire and its obstacles have been brought. Is anything else needed to make me decide to give you the tour once again in relation to tragedy insofar as it touches us? And I am going to tell you straight away which one, since I will also tell you by what accident I came across this particular one. In truth, in relation to modern tragedy, I mean contemporary this time, there only exists one single example, and it is not Top of the Pops. And if I intend to give you the tour of a trilogy by Claudel, I will tell you what made me decide to do so. It had been a long time since I read this trilogy, the one that comprises The Hostage, Hard Bread and The Humiliated Father. I was brought back to it a few weeks ago by an accident of which I will give you the accidental side, because, after all, it is amusing to see the use, at least personal, that I make of my own criteria. And since, just as well as I've told you, in a formula, the advantage with formulas is that one can follow them to the letter, i.e. as stupidly as possible, and they still have to get you somewhere. This is just as true for mine as it is for any others. This is what is called the operational side of formulas. I don't pretend to be only operational for other people. In this kind of way that, in reading the correspondence between André Gide and Paul Claudel, which, between you and me, is a correspondence in which they don't pull their punches, I recommend it. But what I am going to tell you has no relation with the object of this correspondence, in which Claudel does not come out well, something that doesn't prevent me from putting Claudel here on the top rung where he deserves to be, i.e. as one of the greatest poets who has ever existed. As it happens, in this correspondence, André Gide is playing his role as director of the Nouvelle Revue Française, as I understand it. Not just the Revue, but the books it was editing at the time, at a time which was before 1914. It concerns exactly the edition of The Hostage. and take good note not of the content but of the role and the function that I have given him. For it is very much here that the effective cause of what you will hear about during 1 or 2 sessions of talking about this trilogy, as there isn't another one like it, is that one of the problems that it concerns over the course of 2 or 3 letters, and these are about the printing of the hostage, is that it was going to have to be necessary to cast a print character that didn't exist. Not only at the printers of the Nouvelle Revue Française, but at any other, the capital U with a circumflex accent. For never at any point had the French language had need of a capital U with a circumflex. It's Paul Claudel who, in calling his heroine Signe de Cufontaine, and at the same time in the name of poetic license with an accent over the U of Cufontaine, presents this little problem to the typographers of inserting the correct, legible copies into an edition for what is a theatrical play. Something that, as the names of the characters are written in capitals, at the limits would not have caused problems in relation to the lowercase u with a circumflex, does in relation to the capital letter. At this sign of the missing signifier, I told myself that there must be something fishy going on, and that to reread The Hostage, at the least, would get me somewhere. That led me to rereading a large part of Claudel's plays. In doing so, I was, as of course you are expecting, rewarded. I want to bring your attention to this. The Hostage, to begin with, this play is a work about which Claudel himself writes. At the time when he wrote it, and when he was, as you know, a civil servant in the Foreign Office, representative of France with I don't know what title, let's say something like advisor, probably more than attaché. Anyway, he was a civil servant of the Republic, at a time when this still meant something. Claudel writes to André Gide that he wanted all the same, given the overly reactionary feel, it is he himself who expresses it in this way, for the thing, for it not to be signed Claudel. Don't smile at this prudence. Prudence has always been considered to be a moral virtue. And believe you me, we would be wrong to believe, because it is perhaps no longer in fashion, that we should as such doubt the last of those who showed some signs of it. It is certain from reading The Hostage, I will say, that the values that are stirred up in it, that we would call matters of faith. Let me remind you that it revolves around a sombre story that is supposed to have happened at the time of the first Emperor Napoleon. A lady who is beginning to be a bit of an old maid, left on the shelf. Don't forget that the time that has passed since she has been engaged in a heroic task, which is that, let's say that it has been going on for 10 years, since the story is supposed to have been happening at the height of Napoleon's power, and that what it is about is naturally arranged, transformed for the needs of the drama. It's the story of the constraint exercised by the emperor in relation to the Pope. Hence, this puts us a bit more than 10 years from the epoch when the trials of Signe de Cufontaine began.